nature is undervalued. Whatever that amount is, it is dramatically undervalued relative to how it's priced into our economic system. For too long, we've treated nature as an externality.
Hey, Karl, how's it going?
Erum, do you ever think about what happens when AI takes over?
Yeah, I'm thinking I'm going to be on a beach with a drink, just taking in the sun with a lot of sunscreen and probably under an umbrella. But what do you think?
I hope you're right, and I hope that I could be joining you somewhere on a beach. But there's a story that's just gone viral from Citrini Research, which is a financial analysis firm. And they've written a piece called The Global Intelligence Crisis of 2028, where they talk about how the entire global economy and financial systems are built on one idea, that human intelligence is a scarce and valuable research. But unfortunately, AI is going to threaten that and destroy it permanently because that so-called intelligence premium doesn't matter to AI. So how does that change your thinking about being on the beach once AI takes over?
Yeah, I guess it depends. Obviously, there's going to be winners and losers. I would just say one thing, and actually, I've been thinking about this for a while. And because you said our financial systems are built on the assumption of human intelligence, I had been thinking about this, and really our financial systems are built on trust. And if we don't trust the AI, then we might not use it, right? Like even money, right? Like the dollar, there's a whole reason why people accept it is because we trust it. And this is like the question of cryptocurrency. People aren't using it because they don't trust it. So I would say that as an aside of like our whole financial system and economy is built on trust. But yeah, the intelligence premium, I think to rethink a system. I mean, there's AI intelligence that's artificial, but then I'm thinking of like what's more dangerous than artificial intelligence.
Yeah. Okay. Before you talk about what's more dangerous than artificial intelligence, I just want to direct our listeners to this article because it kind of shows how the system is built on this idea of human intelligence. But then as companies invest more in AI, they create this flywheel where they need less humans. And then these smart humans who have been these white collar workers are getting displaced and they end up going into blue collar jobs. And that in terms puts pressure on those jobs, which don't need AI, because then you have more people trying to do those jobs. But then it ends up really wreaking havoc in the financial system because so much of the financial system is predicated on different companies making money along the way. So subscriptions, SaaS products, even things like credit card fees. And you mentioned cryptocurrency in this article. The authors make the point that AI realizes that they're paying so much money to MasterCard, Visa, and American Express that they could pay less if they use crypto. So crypto becomes more important. But the whole thing is super interesting because it talks about the economic shocks and how we're just not prepared even for this would be the worst case scenario, but it doesn't even talk about how we're prepared for the best case scenario. So you're talking about what's more dangerous than AI. What's more dangerous than AI?
Well, according to a new show I'm watching, it's UI, which is uploaded intelligence.
Wait, what?
Yeah. Yeah. So, I was on Reels, like just looking at videos as one does. And there's a video that came up and they're talking about their favorite shows. And the first one they started with was Common Side Effects, which we love that show. Listeners, if you have not seen Common Side Effects, wow, what a great story about biotech and consumer biotech and everything in between. Since we talk about biotech here on the Grow Everything podcast, it's like the perfect show to watch. So that was the first show that they shared. And I was like, okay, I'm tuning in. If you like Common Side Effects, what else do you like? And the next show that they talked about was Pantheon, which is another animated series. And it's about uploaded intelligence. So how human consciousness can live on in the internet, in the virtual world forever. And if you have an uploaded consciousness, if you have a human consciousness that has learned things like feeling and how the world works and taste and everything, it has learned all the things that humans can experience. It got all that data, that raw data processed in its brain that has been evolving for over 3 billion years. And now it's uploaded into this virtual world, interacting with artificial intelligence. It has more uploaded intelligence, or human consciousness has more decision making, it has more motivation, it has other things. Clearly, human intelligence is dangerous.
Where are you watching Pantheon?
I watch it on Netflix.
Okay. And do they mention Scavengers of Rain, by the way?
They did mention it. They did mention it on this like top adult animated shows, I guess you can say. And yeah, Scavenger's Reign was also on there. But this Pantheon, Karl, wow. I mean, the storylines. This is why I like Common Side Effects and now Pantheon, is because these storylines are so rich. And you can do so much more with animation in terms of like highlighting drama, not just like technology, which is of course there. And that also helps.
All right. Well, since we're talking about AI and since the Grow Everything podcast is about biotech, I think it's also worth pointing out that Citrini, the research company I mentioned, has written an investment thesis that investment will move from bits to atoms, which is part of our thesis here at Grow Everything. As this AI bubble shifts, investors will realize that we have to go back to building hard things. So I'll make sure that we put links to both of those in the show notes, and we'd love to hear from you listeners what you think about those.
Yeah. Besides Citrini research writing about this, I did write a LinkedIn post.
Oh, I'm sorry, Erum. I know you did. Yeah.
No, mine was just a few words, like enough of the AI hype, which I mean more of the focus versus like what it's capable of. Of course, it's capable of brilliant things, but it's more like hyping up the internet. You know, it's like, oh my gosh, I'm building this company on the internet. And you're like, okay.
We launch a new website.
And it's like, yeah, everything runs on the internet. So it's like everything runs on AI. But what are you actually doing? What are you actually making or making more efficient with AI? I mean, you know, obviously there's B2B and that's all about efficiency gains and being able to, you know, make things cheaper. But like what we're talking about, use AI to create amazing biotech products that can revolutionize the way that we experience the world and how we consume products. And I'm really excited about that. It's something that I've been thinking about a lot. One of the lenses of biotech products that we have been looking at is biodyes, which we are going to have a biodyes series in a month or so. And we had teased it with an episode that announced the Future of Fungi award winners. And one of those winners is Ricky Cassini of Microma. We had a quick, like 20-minute interview during that episode, but we'll have him back on for a full episode. And why I bring this up too is because I recently went to the Color Factory, which is this immersive experience in New York City. I had taken my son there for his birthday. It was a whole birthday party, so a little pricey, but you know, whatever. It's my son's 5th birthday. I only have one son, so I was like, you know what? Everyone, we're going to the Color Factory. And wow, Karl, I know your kids are older, but you have to go to this place.
Yeah. So one of the things you told me was there was a lot of very vibrant colors being used for food there. Do you think they were using any biologically produced dyes, or do you think they've just resorted to what is on the shelves from whoever makes not so great dyes?
Yeah, I think so this immersive experience has multiple rooms. And the first room has this conveyor belt of fortune cookies that are colored in different colors, and they're super vibrant. So I'm like, these are definitely not natural dyes. And if they are, Color Factory, write to me, tell me I'm wrong. But then there's ice cream towards the end, and that was like a really light blue, which could be made with spirulina. And if it isn't, that's a missed opportunity to introduce natural dyes into food ingredients. But it was incredible. One of the rooms had names of different colors. And the names of colors would be great company names.
Yeah, some of them. For sure. And I'm sure it's been done. I actually have a book, or my wife has a book that has one color per day. So it tells you what is the color for your birthday and what does that color mean? What does it say about you?
Yeah, this one, I'll have to tell you some of these names. Actually, I'm going to pull it up right now. So here's some names of colors. And if you need some inspiration for company names, you have to look at colors. Check out this name. Fulvus is one. Nymphaea. Watchet, Xanthic.
Some of those don't sound real to me.
Heliotrope, Goose Turd Green, which, okay, yeah, that one really is one.
Sounds like a booger color.
Yes, it is. Dutch Orange, I mean, obviously terracotta, Umber, Verdigris.
Verdigris, but that's actually pronounced verdigris.
Verdigris, yes. Egyptian blue, of course, lead white. I mean, there's mixing the actual color with another word. But anyway, I was like going through this Color Factory. I'm like, oh my gosh, the world of color can draw so much inspiration, not only for our everyday lives, but also when we look at making biotech products. We know we experience the world through color. So it's interesting to look at. stay tuned for a BioDi series and we'll talk more about that.
What I think is interesting is that nature is not monochromatic, it's polychromatic. There's all these colors exist in nature. And I think we, in many cases, take them for granted. But someone who doesn't take nature for granted is our guest today, Kevin Webb. Erum, tell us how we got introduced to Kevin.
So Kevin Webb is a managing director of a venture fund called Superorganism. What an amazing name. And I had met him after the Hack Summit, where they were co-hosting like a after conference happy hour event here in Brooklyn. And we were just got to talking about what the thesis is of superorganism, looking at not only biotech companies, but climate tech. And he's going to go into their whole thesis. And we also got doubly introduced to him through our friend Kit McConnell, who you know very well, Karl.
Yeah, we've known Kit for many years. She was at Ginkgo and then she left and worked at a couple of other companies. And we've seen her a number of times over the years at Biofabricate conference. So we're very happy that she landed at Superorganism. So with that, let's let Kevin take it away and talk to us about what Superorganism does and why biodiversity matters. Kevin Webb, Superorganism, we are so happy to have you on the Grow Everything podcast.
I couldn't be more excited to be here.
So let's kick it off and give our guest a little bit of background on who you are. Your background spans venture investing, human biology, sustainability science. Now you're focused on biodiversity-focused capital, which is something we're super interested in. But what was the catalyst that shifted you from backing marketplaces and SaaS unicorns to betting on ecosystems and biodiversity?
So I've been working in VC for 15 years. I originally was working with a family-run VC shop out of the Bay Area called the Webb Investment Network. We did exactly what you talked about, worked with some incredible founders. But my original focus back in undergrad was in biology. My personal passion has always been around natural history. I loved getting outdoors. My bookshelf was filled with books about nature and what we could do about it. And I was finding increasingly that I was finding startups that didn't really fit inside of our mandate, right? They were touching climate or biotech. They were sustainability oriented. They had some really innovative, interesting business models. And at the end of the day, our fund was really incredible, world-class at enterprise software, marketplaces, security, and came to the difficult but very eventually obvious decision that I wanted to chase this idea of building a VC fund for biodiversity where we could break apart the problem of biodiversity loss into venture-sized opportunities. And that was just too far outside of scope for what my last fund was really built for.
Yeah, that's amazing.
Yeah.
I love that. I was first exposed to this idea of biodiversity being a measurement tool for environmental health when I went to the World Biodiversity Summit. It was in 2023. I mean, they have it every year, but that's when I first went to it. And I was just blown away about first, there's a lot of companies that are looking at it under the sustainability lens, doing specific projects. Obviously, there's some technology, which I'm excited to learn more about your portfolio companies. But we often hear, of course, that climate is investable, but biodiversity has historically been seen as harder to quantify. So what change that made you believe that biodiversity could become a venture scale opportunity?
Yeah, great. Let's first talk about the quantifying part. So this is really important, which is the amazing thing that we have with climate-related technologies is, I'm sure if there were a meteorologist or a climatologist in the room, they would yell at me. But the great thing about climate-related opportunities is you can evaluate the apples, oranges against this one metric, which is carbon dioxide equivalent, or CO2e. Whether you're emitting carbon dioxide, whether you're drawing it down, whether you're talking about methane, which has a slightly different impacts in the atmosphere, it all sort of rolls up that way. Biodiversity, so much harder. And there's no one metric that does a really good job of capturing what it is that we're trying to do. You have different geographies, you have different value sets. Are you going to value species that are really rare and only exist on one particular island, or species that happen to have more benefits to humans? Are you going to talk about looking at the ecosystem level, the individuals of a species, the genetic diversity within those populations? We've seen a bunch of different schemes, and there are some really, really smart people who are working on ways to try to financialize these indices in a way that's useful and actionable for poor sustainability managers at companies who are being tasked with how do we account for our biodiversity impacts across our supply chains. We're long on this opportunity, but I would say for now, our view is that biodiversity technology driven companies are being started, have always been started. It's just they haven't really been given one central home. So we end up investing in a lot of companies that might be raising as ag tech plays, climate plays, or biotech plays, or your typical deep tech approach, but where conservationists can benefit.
I have a kind of related add-on question to that, because I'm under the impression that we don't really have a sense in terms of what the value of nature is. We extract a lot of oil and we have this very extractive culture. And I've heard different people talk about, hey, we're going to really figure out what nature is worth, which is probably in the trillions of dollars. How does that impact what you guys think about?
I think we could have some very interesting debates about the degree to which nature is undervalued. But I, as a very early stage VC, get to be a little hand wavy here. And my answer is whatever that amount is, it is dramatically undervalued relative to how it's priced into our economic system. For too long, we've treated nature as an externality, right? You wouldn't have rational economic actors who are doing mass deforestation if the value of trees in the Amazon were properly reconciled in their incentives, right? The fact that that still occurs means that we have work to do to try to make those externalities internal to decision making. And then for us, as we think about our investment, we are really, sometimes we have to be really skeptical because we assume the world isn't going to dramatically change. But our portfolio structure is such where if those values were recognized, a lot of our companies will benefit that much more.
Yeah, no, that's super interesting. Could you give us a picture of superorganism for our listeners? If someone steps inside your portfolio, what kind of companies, technologies, landscapes are they going to encounter?
Yeah, it's going to surprise no one that we're nerds. So at a high level, we're building this VC fund to do two things, right? It's invest in companies that fit a VC shape, right? We have to believe they're $1 billion plus outcomes. We have to believe in the founders. We have to believe in the market opportunity, all of that. But the second thing, which really is our special differentiating sauce, is we have to believe that that company can make a difference for nature near term, and then at least proportionately at scale. That takes us to three big areas where we see investable opportunities. The first is we're obsessed with what industries have been tied to nature loss historically, and we're vetting them through how much can the startups that we're evaluating disrupt, transition them to better, more sustainable practices, and make a big dent on the literal extinction drivers that are contributing to nature loss at scale, right? So can this startup make a dent on pollution, invasive species, habitat loss, or overexploitation of natural resources? The second big theme for us is where we most intersect with climate. So we are evaluating climate-related startups, but specifically how they intersect with biodiversity. So we're doing technology for nature-based solutions, technology for nature as adaptation to rising sea levels, rising temperatures, things like wildfire, soil, water. We're not going to be the people who are doing mobility or renewable energy deployments, but we would look at how do we do all of that and move faster on the environmental permitting side. And then we do a lot of deep tech. So AI, remote sensing, biotech, places where we want to find cool, shiny new tools. And then we could be the ones who are like, oh, we have a conservationist friend who could do some really, really interesting stuff with this.
Yeah. Oh my gosh. So fascinating. And two of your portfolio companies have been on this podcast, Foray Biosciences and Sway. So we'll link to those episodes in their show notes so people can hear how Superorganism has supported these types of companies. I'm so excited to share that.
Two companies so far.
Two companies so far, yes. Yeah, I mean, this is a great partnership to get more guests on. I mean, I looked at some of the other portfolio companies, and yes, they are great ones that we would love to have on. But let's first talk about this term superorganism. First of all, great name for a band, and I think there is a band called Superorganism. But superorganism suggests interdependence and networked intelligence. How does that concept shape the way that you think about venture strategy and portfolio construction?
Totally. Great question. Do we have time for me to tell what the original name was going to be?
Yes.
Yes.
Because I think it's a good contrast. So
yes.
We were originally going to be Wildlife Ventures. It turns out there's so many different VC funds out there that take nature-inspired names, Sequoia, a bunch of others. Sequoia is great, by the way.
Yes.
But they don't necessarily have anything to do with nature and their strategy, right? Like it turns out nature's great for metaphors and all sorts of things. And so we had a really hard time coming up with a fun name. We eventually landed on Wildlife Ventures. I was ready to be done with it. My partner, Tom, who's also incredible, was kind of getting ready. We're about to pull the trigger, talked with one of our advisors who's done a lot of work in the conservation space. And this is David Lang, also great, a good guest if you haven't had him. And he was like, I see where you're coming from, but please God, no. When I hear this word, it's loaded, right? When I hear this word, I think of polar bears on ice caps that are dying and humans are the problem. And I think what you're trying to do is something more abundant.
Mhm.
And I left that call annoyed because I knew he was right. And I went away. And when I came back, Tom, my partner, had written up on the whiteboard in big letters, superorganism. And it was pretty perfect. It talks about that abundance mentality. It talks about, the biological word is basically, think of an ant colony where it's all of the individuals together contributing to a greater whole, acting as one. There's sci-fi implications of multiple different species, multiple different systems. Technology can feel like it fits into there. And it's really core to our philosophy, right? So we're really trying to live at the interstitial between conservation and entrepreneurship. And we love forming these kinds of connections and getting out of the way.
Yeah, I just have one quick follow up to that too. You mentioned abundance a couple times, and this is something that Carl and I had talked about a few times recently, and it has come up. There was during Davos, Larry Fink of BlackRock interviewed Elon Musk, and they were talking about abundance a little bit, and obviously the Elon way, to get abundance to go off planet, interstellar colonization. Okay, that's one thing, but to be able to have abundance, how do you see biodiversity relate to abundance?
I mean, in many ways, biodiversity is the source of abundance. We have inherited the greatest genetic diversity in the history of the planet, the greatest species diversity in the history of the planet. We are the first species ever to be able to understand the lineage of these things. We are spending a ton of resources to try to find life on other planets. But we have the best life diversity in the known universe right here, right? And that's led to drugs and to food security. It's a pretty high proportion of the planet that depends on wildlife nature for daily sustenance. So nature is already core to infrastructure. And what we're talking about is not something radical. It's just as we build systems that no longer are quite as dependent on direct extraction as we once needed, how do we build a future that is healthier, more sustainable, good for people, also leaves a lot of space for wildlife?
Yeah, and I think it goes back to what I said earlier. You're absolutely right. We've inherited this incredible biodiversity, and unfortunately, we take it for granted. And I'd like to think that that's going to change maybe during the course of our lifetimes when people are going to start to understand what nature has given us and how important it is. And I think about it, also just purely from, I'm also a nature guy. I love hiking. I'm usually out hiking if I'm not in the city, but also from a purely technological point of view, like this is the fantastic thing about biotech. It's like, there's microbes that can do everything, but we can engineer them to do other things that we need. And where else is that possible? At least in the solar system, we don't know yet, but we're very lucky. Let's talk about the investments that you guys have made, because you go from idea stage to IPO. What's different about supporting biodiversity founders compared to the traditional tech entrepreneurs that you worked with previously?
Yeah. So this surprises a lot of people. It's in a lot of ways not that different, right? You've got people who need disproportionate passion. You've got to believe their backgrounds. You've got to believe their motivation. Starting a company is inevitably hard. Starting a company that also supports nature at the same time, I would argue, is harder. But the good news is the amount of resolve that we find in our entrepreneurs is at least commensurate with that. I'm sorry for saying commensurate. That was all right.
It's
Great.
allowed. We're all nerds.
All right. But yeah, so there's disproportionate passion that's there. I
Yeah.
think the piece that is different is a lot of these companies, we're solving from first principles with them, right? Like we've got a company that is Inversa making high-end luxury leather out of invasive species. I'm unfamiliar with anyone else doing this. They are now partnering with state governments like Florida to help with a lot of the work that they're doing with managing their invasive Burmese python problem in the Everglades. There's not really a roadmap. And so we get to have calls with Arav and hear what they're working on, what they're thinking about, and then roll up our sleeves. Ashley from Foray, you've spoken with. they're doing some really, really cool stuff technically. And being able to make connections across the conservation world is what gets us excited.
Wow. Yeah. Invasive pythons to make, wow, that's great.
Haven't you seen, like, they have bounty hunters, or the state of Florida has bounties for people who go out there and catch these pythons, and they're enormous. And because they're an alpha species, they've basically destroyed the ecosystems. I mean, these pythons are eating the deer. So it's incredible.
If we have time for a small tangent on pythons,
Yes.
I've been kind of obsessed with this issue since I was in high school. And I remember reading a paper about how well the pythons were adapting to the Everglades. And the tone of it was like, oh, they're actually kind of carving out a new niche. And then a year later, as I remember it, a year later, same paper, totally different tone. It was, oh my God, there's pythons everywhere. They blend in perfectly. They're eating everything. Mammal numbers are declining. We have no idea how many there are. And so what's cool about Adversa is now they've had the most successful harvest, working with a lot of those bounty contractors that's ever happened in the history of Florida. So we're hoping that this could be consistent pressure and help to manage the problem.
Yeah, just another tangent. What it reminds me of, too, is the hippopotamus in Colombia that have taken over the river. And those had been brought by Pablo Escobar as pets. And now they're a huge problem because hippos are incredibly prolific and they are also super ferocious. So you can't go near them. Anyway, maybe that's the next market, is hippo leather from Colombia.
Oh my gosh, this is crazy. We really went on a tough tangent here.
If ever comes on, you should ask him.
No, let's continue. Because
Erum, bring it in.
Bring it in. I'm reeling it back. But I mean, this really quick though, like this idea of invasive species is like, okay, the ecosystems are out of balance. And, you mentioned that these pythons were eating deer, but deer's also becoming invasive up here in the Northeast. And so the balancing act, I think, is really interesting because, okay, you're going to, especially if there's like an economic incentive to get rid of the pythons. And if they're all gone and used, then will there be an abundance or an invasiveness of another species because they aren't kept in check? So it's a very interesting balancing act.
Yeah, totally. So first on deer, technically not invasive. They're overabundant. We've removed a lot of predators, and they've done really, really well with the kind of infrastructure and landscape we've built where they adapt well to lawns and things like that. Really great book called Crossings that has a whole chapter on the abundance of deer and how they've picked up in numbers. I need to stop talking on this one or I'm going to keep going. And then on pythons and a lot of the things that Inversa is going after, we spent a lot of time on this. Do you end up having a perverse incentive to not remove all of the animals? We personally think it would be amazing if they work themselves out of a job because there's thousands of invasive species around the world they could help manage still. And what a great story. Oh, unfortunately, no conservationists that we talked to thought that it would be possible to do complete removal. So we're hoping that this is continued pressure.
I'd like to see examples of success where a species is introduced to combat an invasive species, because I think that it sounds like an easy fix to things. I imagine it always goes wrong, but I want to see the examples of where it has actually worked.
Yeah, I mean, invasive removals on islands have been a major success story. A friend of ours, Carl Campbell, did a lot of work with goats in the Galapagos. And, you're able to do that, and then you end up having less pressure, and you can have giant tortoise populations come back. So it's worked really well in islands. It's an ongoing concern in the mainland. It's a lot trickier in the mainland because you've got huge numbers you're dealing with in vast areas. But with effort, it's really cool. There's some also really cool stuff about removing rats and then that on islands and that having downstream positive effects for coral reefs of all things.
Oh, nice. Oh, I like to hear that. Okay. All right. So let's get back. Okay. So we're talking about nature, and nature often operates on long time horizons, but venture capital often works on compressed timelines. So how do you navigate the tension between ecological reality and investor expectations?
The answer is we're picky, right? We are one instrument. VC is a great instrument at doing some things, a terrible instrument at doing others. We have a 10-year obligation to our investors to return capital. That precludes us from a lot of things that are really interesting that are very nature positive, right? So we're not doing projects, we're not doing conservation technology that's really vectored toward just conservationists. We are trying to thread the needle and do both. And we think that there should be a lot more types of financial instruments at play. So that's it. We just have to be picky.
Yeah, that's
Yeah.
like a whole other conversation we should have. I know, Rem, you're thinking this too, because we see it particularly with biotech, where you're still, a lot of times the VCs investing in science that the market isn't ready for. And so the incentives are misaligned. And so there's a lot of room for other kinds of financing to come in there that is able to be a little bit longer term. But let me ask this, because you've studied humans, we've talked about changing environments, you also have talked about infectious diseases. How does that lens of looking at so many diverse things influence the way you think about biodiversity as infrastructure for health and economic stability?
Oh, I love this question. It doesn't come up nearly enough. We've seen with major diseases in the past decade that what's happening on our landscape and what happens within our communities is interlinked, right? From COVID to you've got Lyme disease happening at higher than ever rates here in the Northeast. When you encroach on intact habitat, you have more opportunity for disease spillover. When you create an environment where we have a superabundance of deer and you have ticks that are really well suited for warm temperatures, so they don't die off in the winters as often as they usually do because now we have warmer winters, you have more likelihood of disease. So one answer is doing a better job of keeping ecosystems intact and having better monitoring systems. I think there's other health dimensions at play, though, with a biodiversity focus, right? So you've got one of the things we talk about doing is trying to avoid pollution in the first place. Pollution is really bad for species, ecosystems. Turns out other species are genetically related to us by a lot. And so when you're releasing microplastics and PCBs or whatever else you want to talk about, and that has a negative impact on other species, very frequently it's not great for us either. And so I could talk about having a biodiversity mindset, but that also is going to directly translate into human health benefits. So you've got a lower load of health risks. And then beyond that, there's a lot more of a body of research around the mental health benefits of being out in nature.
Yeah.
And I think that's going to be increasingly important too.
Yeah, I mean, the thing with ticks and Lyme, the ticks that are carrying alpha-gal disease, the way I understand it, and correct me if I'm wrong, is alpha-gal basically makes you allergic to meat or meat products.
Yeah, and it's it's prevalent in like Texas, where you least want that, right?
Yeah, exactly. And so because of climate, this disease is making itself further available into the north. So it's definitely something I think about when I'm gearing up to go hiking. I used to always hike in shorts. I never do anymore, or hardly ever do. And I've been bit by ticks several times, so I know what it's like. But thankfully, no alpha-gal and no Lyme.
Oh my gosh, that's terrifying. And hopefully,
yeah, exactly.
Yeah, I mean, okay. But this idea of biodiversity and human health, I mean, another thing that it comes to mind is the idea of diverse produce and how we've monocultured our way to having one type of corn versus like 10,000 different varieties, as was before we industrialized agriculture, potatoes, peppers, all of it. And now we're left with, I mean, it still looks pretty abundant in some supermarkets, but it could have been a lot more diverse, and all the nutrients that we might have lost because of the biodiversity loss that keeps our health in check. And I think that's something that, if there's anyone working on a technology to support biodiverse produce, I mean, that would be super interesting.
Totally. Like if you could manage that complexity of produce, but in a way where it feels as simple as having one monocultured crop to the farmer to every step along the way, I fully believe we've got technology to do that now. It's super interesting.
Yay. Awesome. Okay. But we still are looking for founders and technologists to be able to build the things we need to have a more biodiverse planet. But in your conversations with founders, what's the biggest misconception about building in the biodiversity space right now?
Yeah, I'm going to give an answer for right now, which is unfortunately a little bit of a hard truth, which is you're not going to get extra credit for doing the right thing for biodiversity in the venture ecosystem. you will with us. We care a lot. But we're a $25 million pre-seed seed fund. We'll invest a little bit in pro rata, but we tap out pretty quickly. And so when we are thinking about our businesses, we have to think a lot about who comes next and how does this play with the right kind of partner, whether it's a generalist, whether it's a climate tech fund, whether it's a sustainability or a biotech. How do we make sure that their success metrics are baked in there? And then we could do the heavy lifting with them to try to make the biodiversity linkage built in, difficult to remove over time.
Okay, so you just mentioned you're a $25 million fund. You just raised that amount. What surprised you most as you were out there fundraising from your LPs? And what does it say about where the market is heading?
Okay, first of all, I assume you have some other GPs starting funds for the first time who listen. I would give one strong piece of advice, which is know who you're raising from, at least to start, before you start. That would have been a really smart thing to do. The benefit of how we did our raise, though, was several things. One, we had a really differentiated thing that we were trying to do. So we got good first meetings. We got people who were curious. The amazing thing that happened over time was we got to meet a lot of fellow travelers. So there were family offices, individuals, foundations, donor advised funds, groups that we eventually through connections got connected with who were grappling with the same thing of we have these assets, we want to invest some of them, and we want to do that in a way that aligns with the work that we're maybe doing in the philanthropy that we're doing over here. And we're starting to see some really interesting business opportunities that don't really belong in anything that we've invested in so far. And so the biggest thing has just been getting to know the right people. We're not in the world of trying to convince anyone. I feel very lucky to get to work with our partners on this.
That's very cool.
Question, and you don't have to answer this. I'm not sure if this is public, but can you share who your LPs are?
Yeah. So we just announced Fund One a couple of weeks ago. So we're working with a great number of folks. Jeff Jordan from Andreessen Horowitz, who previously was CEO at OpenTable, I've known for a long time. We're working with Builders Vision, which is Lucas Walton's family office, does a lot on climate, on oceans, and on agriculture. They were excited about the biodiversity element because it kind of cuts across all of those themes. Also working with some nature-focused family offices, so A&B Holdings, Understory Ventures out of Australia, corporate foundations, so Cisco Foundation, BTG TIG, which is a major forestry player, ended up investing. They've been great partners for us when we're looking at things like a foray, like a funga.
Amazing.
It's interesting about the Australia partners because I believe the longest living continuous rainforest and most diverse is in Australia. And
Northern Australia, yeah.
Yeah, northeast. It's like 180 million years old. Definitely on a bucket list. Maybe you guys can have like a superorganism retreat there. That'd be cool. Can I come?
Yeah.
Raising my hand for that
I'm
one.
not upset about having LPs out of Australia. It's not the worst.
They know.
Yeah.
They know
And
what's up.
We're also under the impression that these family offices are much more willing to take this long-term point of view because they're trying to preserve and grow capital. And so investing in nature and biodiversity just seems like it would make a lot of sense. Do you agree? Is that...
I agree. Going back to the question of what's VC good at, we're that high risk, hopefully high return element in a blended portfolio for many of these allocators, right? They're invested in other VCs, but also nature-based solutions. They're also doing direct conservation philanthropy. They're maybe invested in some forestry projects. And if we can end up being successful, and then we can ultimately help subsidize some of those other things in the future, amazing.
Okay, so now we're going to do some visioneering. I love that word, so I always say.
Right.
But looking ahead a decade, what breakthrough, either it's technological, financial, or cultural, do you think will most dramatically shift biodiversity from a niche concern to a mainstream asset class?
Okay, I'm going to cheat on this one too.
Okay, go for it.
I believe if you have a strong viewpoint of what you want to see in the world, you are short shifting yourself if you limit yourself to one theory of change. And going back to nature is categorically undervalued, and there's so many different ways that you could have that value show up. I think there's a lot of cool things that could happen in the next decade that could dramatically shift things. So one, regulations, right? So the EU has some really cool ones, CSRD, EUDR, tasking companies with measuring their biodiversity impacts, in one case for showing that their products are deforestation free. There's a voluntary thing called TNFD, the Task Force on Nature-Related Financial Disclosures. I resent that I've had to learn so many acronyms too, but it's a voluntary agreement that trillions of dollars in assets under management have agreed to comply with, where you're trying to account for your nature impacts as a major corporation. If that starts flipping, really interesting. The other piece on regulations is, we spend, last I saw, $2.5 trillion a year on subsidies for nature harming practices. If you just started putting pressure on some of those things, you leave a lot more space for more nature positive businesses to be a little bit more competitive. So that would be really, really leveraged. Okay, technology. Technology is a big one, right? So it is possible to imagine measuring nature everywhere in the world in real time in the not so distant future. You've got satellites, you've got genetics, you have got really, really powerful camera traps and things like that, thanks to cell phones making all of these sensors way cheaper. And so it's becoming possible where any product you have will have that lineage, that accountability. It won't just be a commodity, it's a commodity with provenance and known impacts. That gets really exciting for me. Culture. If we have a massive cultural shift, maybe in the wake of AI and us all staring at screens that says nature's really important, we really care, we're putting in place policies like the UK is really leading on this with rewilding work and biodiversity net gain. And then our theory of change for superorganism is we want more proof points. Like we want to back the next Chris Tompkins or Yvonne Chouinard from Patagonia or the next Jack Dangermond from Esri, who are building really powerful, big companies and showing that you can do so in a nature positive way. And we hope that that helps activate more capital downstream.
I seem to remember a poll from a few years ago that the majority of Americans across all party lines consider themselves either conservationists or outdoor enthusiasts.
Totally.
And that is, to me, such an incredible statistic because it just shows that there is a lot of people who really do appreciate what nature offers and they understand how important it is. But then there's been this division across politics that have separated us. And I think that's one of those forces that we politically could tap into.
Totally. There's a really cool organization called Nature's Nonpartisan worth checking out.
Yeah.
Yeah. Yeah. I mean, there's so much to unpack with that too, with the cultural shift. I watched recently, Michael Pollan was being interviewed, and he has a book coming out about consciousness. It's called A World Appears. It's going to be released on Tuesday. Not that they sponsor us or anything, but I'm paying attention because a part of his research has been about the consciousness of animals and quantifying that, observing it. There was an X Prize that is either being made, or I don't know if it's been released, about understanding animal communication, to be able to speak to animals. And to be able to see that, and I know a lot of us have pets, so we know that there is consciousness in some type of relationship, but to be able to see that on a larger scale with more diverse animals, that gives you pause and think, okay, well, maybe there's something there. But then, of course, the other side of it is like the morality side, which is, are you going to kill all these animals? It's like, well, we have to eat. And there's a whole idea of interacting with conscious beings. I think it's really interesting as people learn more about it.
Oh my goodness. I so strongly agree. And that was the other fringe point for what could happen in the next 10 years. I believe very strongly that if it's ever going to be possible to decode animal language into something that is probably not going to be one-to-one with human language, but something that's understandable, it's going to happen in the next 10 years.
Yeah.
And grapple the same way that other species share a lot of our biology. So when we pollute and emit something that's not great for them, it probably isn't great for us. Same thing with consciousness and intelligence, right? We did not evolve in a vacuum.
Yes, exactly. Oh, great way to end the interview part of this. But now we're getting to the next segment, which is our quick fire round. And so we're going to ask you a series of questions, quick answers. You ready?
Yep.
Okay, here we go. Species you'd invest in if nature had a pitch deck.
Really any keystone species, but I'm going to go with sea otters. Sea otters are, obviously, scientifically speaking, adorable, but really, really important from a carbon management perspective. They used to exist continuously all the way from California through to Japan. They were overhunted. They're coming back in some places. There's some places where they're absent. We've lost a lot of kelp. You do that, you uplift a lot of other species around them too.
Wow.
Amazing.
Wow.
Most underrated ecosystem on Earth.
I'm going to say whatever ecosystem is in your backyard is the most underrated one.
Oh, wow.
I love that.
Yes.
Yeah. This feels like a high horse answer, but
No. That's
true.
great, though. It's true. It is so true.
Yeah. And it's important, too, because when we talk about climate change and biodiversity loss, climate change is a really tough problem for you as an individual to solve, right? You can do a lot, but it's ultimately a systems problem. Biodiversity loss, though, you can actually do something about in your own backyard. You can plant native species, you can get involved in your local park, and you can see uplift in the matter of months, years in a pretty material way.
Yeah. I love that. I love that answer. Okay. One biodiversity myth you'd love to retire.
Similarly to the backyard, it's that nature is out there somewhere. It's everywhere. There's a lot of different places where you can be acting. And then, the other one for us as a business is we sometimes run into people who are like, you can't make money with nature or biodiversity. Our whole existence is to prove that wrong. So I have to mention that one too.
Okay. One species you'd put on your board of directors.
I thought a lot about this one. Giant Pacific octopus. Several reasons. They're super smart. 2, obviously, they could multitask. That sounds great.
All the arms.
I've always wanted to know one socially. And then worst case scenario, this one's a little bleak, but sometimes you get a bad board member and you're stuck with them a really long time. Giant Pacific octopuses only live 3 to 5 years. So there's a natural succession.
Oh my gosh, that's so good. I love octopuses. I sometimes say octopi, but octopuses is the right way of saying it. Such a great answer. Oh my God, I love it. Decentralized intelligence, multiple arms, it could fit into a hole.
Pick stuff up. They're mischievous.
Yes,
they can change colors. You'll know exactly how upset they are with whatever you're proposing.
Yeah. Desert island. You get one ecosystem to protect forever. Which is it?
And I'm living on this desert island with that ecosystem forever. Okay, coastal redwoods, no question. I grew up in the Bay Area. I'm a Bay Area kid. That's what feels most like nature to me. The trees are incredible. You get this fog-covered, cool area. Seems like a really nice way to live on a desert island.
Yes, I love that. I love that forests. They're just so nice. If I had to choose like a next house, it would be a house in the woods in the forest, a lake house.
Although now my inner conservationist is panicking. I should say my technical answer is whatever ecosystem is on that island.
Is there,
but in hypothetical worlds, redwoods.
Right, redwoods.
Awesome. Kevin, you have been such a great guest. We want to hang out with you since you're in our neighborhood and have you come back on to see what kind of progress you guys make. And I think we need to look at your portfolio to see who we got to get on the podcast.
Absolutely. I've got recommendations. Awesome. This is a delight. Thank you so much for what you're doing.
Hey, this episode is sponsored by Messaging Lab. At Messaging Lab, we translate complex science and economics into compelling business narratives. And we have done so for the most successful biotech-forward companies across pharma, agriculture, personal care and beauty, materials, and the list goes on. We're here to make sure your ideas not only get heard, but resonate with your audience. So if it's time to amplify your company's voice and elevate your business, visit us at messaginglab.com. Let's grow.
Erum, how do you like this conversation with Kevin?
I loved it. I'm so happy we had a chance to get to know him more over the podcast. He's here in Brooklyn. He's in our little circle, which I'm excited to talk to him more, but he has such a great experience, right? He's studied biology, studied sustainability. He's worked at venture funds on the big B2B SaaS world, and then finally comes to and arrives. He arrives here looking at nature, looking at biodiversity as the lens into which invest in companies. I was like, this is the perfect person to speak to. And I really liked his core idea that nature runs through our entire economy. This is something that we always talk about too. We always say that the Venn diagram between climate and biology is a circle. It is the same thing. And we got that from our friend, Kristen Ellis, who also worked in venture capital. And so him saying that nature runs through the entire economy is also their investment thesis. So I really like that. What were your key takeaways?
Kevin and I, we talked about it a little bit at the beginning, where we also know that we disregard the value of nature. We take it for granted. And I've talked about this book, Free Gifts, that I have started to listen to, where because we take nature for granted, we continue to destroy it and extract from it, where we know that there's a microbe for everything. Every problem that we need to solve on this planet, there's probably a natural solution to it. It might be something that exists wild type, or it might be something that we need to engineer to work a little bit better. But what I do appreciate about the way that Kevin presented the company is that they're very clear in terms of their investment thesis. They're tackling extinction drivers, they're going after climate and biodiversity, and they also have deep tech that is across the board on those things. So I think it's very related to what we talk about here at Grow Everything. And we have had superorganism companies on the podcast. Foray and Sway are two of those companies.
One of the other things that it gets challenging when you're looking at biodiversity as a tool in which to measure the health of the environment and the economy, it is hard but investable, right? So when he was talking about when it comes to climate tech, there's like really, everyone measures climate solutions by CO2, right? But what is the CO2 equivalent for biodiversity? And it's challenging. There's multiple dimensions, like we talked about species, how populated or depopulated different species are in a certain area, and invasive species. And we also talked about the biodiversity of plants in a given area. One of the things we didn't talk about, which I hope, Kevin, we can bring it back on the pod and talk to him more about, or obviously when we see him in Brooklyn, is the idea of measuring microbes in a given area and how that is could be a measurement for how healthy an environment is or not, depending on what microbes are there. Like I'm thinking particularly of soil microbiomes, because we know that the soil microbiome is very important to the health of plants and being very fertile, and that there is an issue of barren land because of the overharvesting of plants, monoculture plants. So you're not really getting, there's not a lot of diverse microbes there if there's not a lot of diverse plants there. So that's one thing I wanted to talk to him about. And the other thing that I didn't bring up that I wanted to talk about measuring biodiversity is this concept of eDNA. Have you heard of that, Karl?
I don't know what that is.
Yeah, there's this company that I met at that World Biodiversity Summit. And what they do is they take like a device, like an Oxford nanopore or some other type of device that can take a sample and see what type of DNA is out there in a sample, and they give a sample. So you can take water samples and see what DNA is in that little water sample to see how much and how diverse of life is in that specific location. Which is, I think, with that technology, it'll be interesting to see how devices are built around that to get a wider lens of how diverse a certain area is. And then, of course, we throw other tools to process all the data and the pattern recognition.
There's a couple things. First, there are lichen that grow on trees that basically signal that a forest is healthy. I didn't know that until Kristen pointed it out to me. And they're very specific and very invisible unless you are looking for them. But this eDNA idea is very interesting too, because measuring the health of an ecosystem seems like it would be very valuable. And Kevin did talk about sensors and sensing being one of the things that they invest in. Yeah. So I think that people working on that, here's Superorganism, and they're looking at companies that are doing this, because understanding the health of an ecosystem is super important. And it goes back to, what I said at the top of the episode of the commentary, that we don't really understand the value of nature. We take it for granted. And if we are able to measure what is around us, then I think it gives us the opportunity to be more thoughtful or intentional, or even just consider that these things have value instead of just like extracting and going scorched earth on everything.
Yeah. Well said. And I will also say that if there are any founders listening, before you get really excited about, oh my gosh, my technology or my company is focused on biodiversity, it's not just biodiversity alone, but that narrative isn't the only thing that will win with Superorganism or any company. Unfortunately, when it comes to biodiversity or sustainability, those are table stakes. When it comes to biotech, we say sustainability is table stakes when it comes to any company that's leveraging biotech. And then this comes back to the thing that we always say all the time, more when we do our messaging lab work, but also on the podcast, is that your technology isn't what wins. It's the outcomes of your company and the value it generates, not only for your customer, but also for investors if you're seeking venture capital. So there has to be money being made when you're seeking venture capital. There's VCs who have invested in science projects, of course. Of course, it's not why they're investing. They're hoping that a business model comes into fruition and customers come to the forefront and start purchasing. But to really win, how does the money flow? How does that flow through the company and to the world and back into the pockets of investors? So I just wanted to point that out because we're still speaking to founders. I'm going to be speaking on a panel tomorrow about biomedical startups and what's going on there. And one of the messages I will always say is that enough with the technology, talk about the outcomes.
Talk about the benefits.
And the benefits.
Sell the sizzle, not the steak.
There we go. I'm going to use that.
Classic advertising lingo. I just want to add one more thing about this conversation. I felt like there was some Ministry of the Future vibes going on with Kevin. Ministry of the Future is a book by Kim Stanley Robinson, came out many years ago, and it talks about, not to give it away, but one of the things that goes on in the book is this talk about rewilding parts of the planet. And there's people starting to talk about this a little bit, where you let nature just kind of run its course the way it would anyway, were humans not to be around. And we saw some of this happen during the COVID shutdowns, where dolphins were swimming into bays that they were never in, and wild animals like coyotes and bears are showing up on streets in suburbs. And I think that with the moment we really start pricing nature correctly via measurements, you talked about eDNA and these kinds of tools, via regulation, and even just like our culture shift, which is something that I talked to Kevin about, then I think funds like Superorganism and their portfolio companies are going to scale really quickly, because there is an urgent need to address the climate crisis and what's coming, even if people want to pretend that it's not.
Oh, yeah. It's here. It's here in bits and pieces. We're living here in Brooklyn, and we don't get to really feel the impacts so much. But people in other parts of the world, climate is a very real issue. And we hope that there's more solutions that are either shared, or I like your, just leave it alone. Let nature take its course. But of course, there are people that they're building solutions to help accelerate some climate solutions and making our planet more habitable and livable and fun place to live. So
I'll go back to what I used to say a lot during the beginning of the podcast. We need every solution everywhere all at once.
That's the next movie to be made. A nice movie title. So with that, I want to thank Kevin Webb of Superorganism of joining us on the podcast. Thank you, listener, for tuning in to the Grow Everything podcast. Find us on all the streaming channels, of course, the one that you're listening to, but there are others in case you decided to hop streaming channels. Please text us, call us, reach out. We are very responsive to our listeners. We want to thank some of our listeners for reaching out, asking more detailed questions about what they heard on the podcast, getting clarifying questions. I'm not going to say reaching out for intros because it's not what we're going to be doing. But please, you can find all of our contact information in our show notes. Like, subscribe, find us on YouTube. We're everywhere. Thank you for tuning in.
That's the pod. Thank you.